Mark Lomax the second, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on, Shawn.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Um, I've uh, I've been looking forward to our conversation. It's Black History Month, and I don't know. I remember growing up having some apprehension about Black History Month, and it's only been fairly recently that I've started to find a way to celebrate it, actually use it as a positive thing. Because in the past it always seemed like folks are trying to shove all the stuff that they don't want to deal with into 1 month, and then now since we did that, see, we gave you your month, happens to be the shortest month. We gave you your month. Now I don't want to talk about this anymore. And so that was always my kind of, it was an aspect of my frustration with it. But now I'm kind of like, okay, well, if that's what it's going to be, then I'm going to make hay. My dad always said, make hay when the sun shines. So I'm going to make some hay. So,
Mhm.
so, um, you're a composer, you're an academic, your father, you're a black man in America. Uh,
Husband, all of the things.
yeah. So, so maybe one thing we could sort of start out with is just some of the challenges associated with wearing a lot of hats. And as a musician, uh, you have to wear a lot of hats if you want to make a living. And then doing that in the context of being a father, of being a husband. You have any thoughts on this topic?
Well, my I'm a preacher's kid. My dad is what they call African-centered theologian, right? So all of his academic work as a theologian in the academy and his practice, his homiletic practice, revolves around the combination of the Christianity we were taught through the slave tradition and learning, relearning, and kind of making connections between our African-centered way of spiritual thought, right? So traditional African ways of being in the world as holistic spiritual human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a kid, I grew up with this notion that the musician or the function of the musician or the jolly griot is not one to just play music in the way that we understand it in the Western kind of sense, right? Where we go, we give concerts, we play gigs, people come, they pay their money, they enjoy it or they don't, they go home, right? No, in the tradition of the African context, the musician's role is multifaceted in the way that we would describe wearing a lot of hats, right?
Right.
So in a lot of ways, yes, you're right. The function of just living as a musician means that we have to do a lot of things because America doesn't really appreciate art music, especially art music from Black folks. But at the same time, the fact that we're in the socio-political situation means that our study of the arts is a privilege that allows us to think deeply about things that a lot of other folks don't necessarily know they need to think about or have a context for how to think about. So I see my work as an artist as fulfilling the function similar to that of the griot, where the history that I read and learn and study and the science of sound that I read, learn, study, and practice uh, puts me at tables that a lot of people, aren't privy to. And in conversations, a lot of people aren't privy to. So I have to represent those people. And then from the stage and from just my position as a community member, help people understand the what, why, and how of where we are today and how we leverage that information to move forward. So I see those hats as privilege. It's an honor, it's a responsibility. And if I don't wear those hats appropriately, then I don't think I'm doing my part as a father and husband to, one, represent my family in a way that makes them proud, and two, do what I can to make the world a better place for them. So it's heavy for sure. You know what I mean? And you get, it feels burdensome sometimes, but it's really an honor and a privilege to do the work that we do.
Yeah, here. I of course totally agree with that. Music has paid every bill I've ever had, facilitated every relationship that I have, led me to my wife, created the closest relationships that I have, friendships. Music has taught me about who I am, things that are maybe on the positive side, maybe some things that I need to work on. It has been a mirror showing
For sure.
music has been a powerful it's been a powerful force, and it's people say this all the time, the gift that keeps giving, which is kind of an overused saying, because for the most part it's applied to things that don't deserve that verbiage, but this definitely does. The gift that keeps giving really does. And because of my love for music and how much music has given back to me, it facilitated a professorship at a major university, and has facilitated many of the views that I have, given me a platform to express those views. And so, yes, it most definitely has been, challenging at times, a lot of times, if I'm honest, but definitely beautiful and worth the struggle, as it were. Yeah, so I don't know if you see the shirt I have on, Harlem Renaissance. This is the Harlem Renaissance was interesting period of time, because it was sort of a time period where a boom in the economy met the arts, as it were. It's kind of an evidence that when you support the arts financially, there's a lot of positive things that can come out of that. Now, we were going to figure a way to do things if the economy was good or not, but it certainly helps when there are those that have a particular view, appreciation for the arts. Unfortunately, it seems as though we're on the downside of folks truly appreciating what I might call, and this is a dangerous expression, I realize, real arts. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't disagree in principle. I would say that, the interesting thing about the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance, is, it covered a couple of decades that were completely opposite, right? The Roaring 20s and the 30s. And of course, one could argue that all of that, to your point, was happening before that, because we always figured out a way to do what we were going to do, and it continued to happen, even though in many cases, I think the Harlem Renaissance is really about the white gaze and white folks figuring out, hey, there's something of value in this intellectual property or this artistic product that's being created by these folks that we have been socialized to think don't have the capacity to do this work, right? The books, the poems, the music, the dance.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
The dance, and all the other quote unquote forms of real art, to use the term you threw out there, right?
I'm going to get in trouble for that.
Oh, well, hey, we can make that high art, low art argument about a lot of things, and all of us can be right and wrong at the same time.
Right.
But it's interesting about now, because I would say that maybe it's not even about high versus low, real versus, whatever art, as much as it is about substance versus spectacle. The rise of social media and things like that. Folks are really after the spectacle, and it's the spectacle that drives a lot of content generation and the way it shapes a lot of the way people perceive the world right now, as opposed to substance, right? If you think about, I don't know if you track how many plays you get on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, and where the viewership drops off, right?
Yeah.
You could have 30 solid minutes of really great content, an hour's worth of really great content. And if you're me, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm boring, but like I see it drop off after a minute or so on some things like
that's
that.
Right.
Instagram,
that's
like
right.
30 seconds, that's all you got.
That's right.
Right? YouTube, maybe we getting 5 to 10 minutes of folks really keyed in, and then it starts falling off. And sometimes, we're academics. We're in a space where, we have thoughts about things and we understand the importance of context. And so it might be that first 5 minutes is just setting the table for the meat that we're, intellectually preparing or have prepared for the audience. And they never get to the meat because they're just dealing with the milk and the hors d'oeuvres, the lighter things at the front, right? So they never get to the context for, getting tired of the pretext, so to speak. So, I think it's really an argument or a tension between substance and spectacle. And for those of us who prefer to work in the areas of substance, we're fighting for attention. And I just don't know how folks think they're going to move forward, fix things, and make the world a better place if they don't dig deeper within themselves to find answers.
Yeah, that's right. I go through these periods where I get nostalgic and I start going back and rewatching stuff. And I'll rewatch a series. For instance, I love The Office. And so I'm constantly watching The Office, and I don't even have to be paying attention. I've seen every episode multiple times. And one of the things that I love Spike Lee's movies. I love Spike. And usually folks, when I tell them that I love Spike, the first thing is, oh, you love Mo Better Blues then, right? That's your favorite Spike movie. And I'm like, I dig that movie. I'd say it's probably top 10.
Not my favorite.
Yeah, but it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite, right? But if I had to pick a top 2 or 3 movies, definitely Bamboozled would be one of those.
That's my number 1.
Yeah,
for sure.
Bamboozled, and then of course I love the Malcolm X movie. But I have I rewatched Bamboozled a couple times. I'm going to do a show on my Thunder's Thoughts live stream this Thursday, reviewing 3 scenes out of that movie. That's a profound movie.
Absolutely.
That is a profound
movie.
And
it's a movie most people didn't dig because, again, substance versus spectacle, right? And he has all of that there. Mantan and Sleep and Eat are definitely the spectacle, right?
Right.
But the metaphor that they carry throughout the film and Delacroix's inner thoughts about all of that and how all of that begins to shift even after they've been really successful is the substance that I think people completely miss. It's dark, but it's dark because of the reality that it's reflecting. You talk about a mirror.
One of the scenes I'm going to review is they assemble the writers.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Who
The white writers
supposedly
and
is
all
going to
that.
be the writers, right?
Yeah.
And there's like one Asian and one one Jewish cat with a fro
Yeah.
that he calls attention to. And it's funny because he says, if it was up to him, he'd have at least one Negro writer. It's his use of the word Negro is very curious throughout the movie. So at least have one Negro writer. And you started to see them go through the same stuff that I hear day in, day out. Excuses made for why there are not more black men in the academy. Exact same stuff. Oh, well, maybe they just couldn't find somebody. Well, maybe they just not as many people that are, qualified. All of this kind of stuff. And I could stack up. There are so many qualified, experienced, expert black men, musicians, black male musicians that I know. I know so many. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so that thought is so laughable. And what it shows you is that it is not a priority. It never has been a priority. And even though we come up with new ways to sort of smuggle in the same old ideas that don't work, there's no evidence that it's ever going to work. Not at least not in a PWI, right? You have some thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think on the surface, it's really about laziness.
Yep.
I mean, fundamentally, it's about laziness. I mean, anybody who wants to figure out anything can figure it out if they really want to. The old folks used to tell me, where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yep.
And so there's laziness, and then I think also, because we see this throughout, there's also this fear, right? If we let them in, then we have to give something up, and that's obviously not true, especially in the case of the academy. I mean, the diversity of thought just makes it stronger, and we know there's a strong business case for that, even in the boardrooms and C-suites, in corporate America, that the more diversity of thought you have based on diversity of experiences and backgrounds, the better able you are to connect with a diverse range of customers that allows you to sell more products to more people, right? In fact, the business case NPR made for diversity in the marketplace said that we, as a country, we lose $1 trillion in GDP every year because we've not created the most inclusive economy that we could have, right? So when you think about the marketplace of ideas, which is what institutions of higher learning are supposed to be, the fact that, there's not real intentionality about bringing diverse perspectives. And we got to qualify that too, because, the higher you get into this, academic space with these terminal degrees, the more most people are trained to think the same way.
Ugh, you stole the words out of my mouth, man.
So diversity is relative in that sense. But to your point about how music is a reflection and we're trained to think a certain way as artists and musicians, that diversity of thought is real, because if you take your craft seriously, it doesn't make sense if I'm a saxophone player to listen to Shawn Wallace and be like, I love Shawn's playing, I need to go sound like Shawn. That doesn't make sense, right? Because that's your intellectual property. I can appreciate your intellectual property, and that appreciation should force me, or at least push me, to go create my own, right? Because the people that are digging Shawn dig Shawn because Shawn sounds like Shawn. The people who dig Mark should be then digging Mark because Mark sounds like Mark. And that's the kind of diversity of thought that, I think we could benefit from. And America has historically lost out on that. And because we don't collectively take advantage of that and leverage that superpower I think we have as a nation that many other countries don't have in the same way, or at the same level.
Right. Right. Yeah, so university, unity in diversity.
Yeah,
that's what this is.
Yep.
Unity in diversity.
It's in the word, it's just not in the practice.
No, it totally is not in the practice. Otherwise, why do you need interdisciplinarity?
Right.
Why is that like a concept? Like what, wait a minute, isn't that redundant? And
then you got to deal with the corporatization of learning and education in general, right? So we can go all the way.
Uh-oh. The thing that part of the thing that, because what you said was one of the good aspects of the idea of diversity, and that is diversity of thought. Mm-hmm. Okay. But in my mind, what seems to happen more often than not is there is a desire for faculties, for student populations to look diverse, but they really want you to think the same.
That's right. That's a problem because it's like being colorblind instead of being color brave, right? We want, again, substance versus spectacle, right? If we have different looking people, that's diversity, even if they think the same and engage the world similarly, because they've been trained to do that across the board. A friend of mine said something really interesting. She said diversity is it's like data. It is the sum total of how many different bodies, in the case of literally diversity, equity, and inclusion, the sum total of different ethnicities represented within a certain context, right? Gender diversity, meaning those who identify as cisgender, male, female, and those who are gender nonconforming. So all the spectrum. If you've got, one person, that's an output. If you've got one person from each of those gender identifications, that's a form of diversity, right? If you've got at least one person from each of the various ethnic identities, that's diversity. And if you've got a mix of different ages, generations, and physical abilities and cognitive abilities in the room too, now you're getting plus points, right? You're getting bonus points because now you're getting into the fringes of what most of America doesn't even want to deal with as it relates to accessibility in the various ways that shows up. And that's an output, but that doesn't really get to what I think the subtext of this conversation is getting to, and that's the real power, transformative power of inclusion and belonging. And the same friend says, if I'm made to feel like I belong, then when I come into the living room, I can move some furniture around. Whose house is it really? Is it our house or is it your house? And you're just including me for a little bit of time to meet your diversity requirements. You know what I mean? And this is what I think the power of, at least in the academic setting, the 60s and 70s were, when you look at, scholars like Dr. Wade Nobles out in San Francisco and Hale Smith at Ohio State, Frank Hale Jr., at Ohio State, and folks like that who were not just making statements and staging righteous protests, but also changing policy and instituting, various classes like Africana Studies, which became an academic program that you can get a degree from in San Francisco. And, we have the Frank Hale Center at OSU because he said, look, we need a place where we can belong on this campus. And they started to build institutions and infrastructure. You don't get that kind of diverse perspectives and action unless you have different people in the room who, yes, might have a certain level of training, but they didn't leave themselves behind, once they got those letters. They brought themselves on up and through, That's the most important thing. And you've been through this process, to get through that process intact as a fully realized human being. That's difficult.
Yeah, one of the issues that I have with the whole diversity and inclusion thing is one viewing of this may reveal that diversity and inclusion is but a sort of refacing a new marketing model of affirmative action. And affirmative action, in its beginnings, the purpose of it was specifically to address issues with black men. It was laser focused at black men. But because of Title IX, women were then now considered minorities, a minority group. And so rather than the original purposes of affirmative action actually going through to fruition, 84% of the beneficiaries ending up being white women.
White women, that's right.
So now the thing is about diversity and inclusion is what they did with diversity and inclusion is they never initially stated the specific purpose that affirmative action had, which was to serve black men. So now you can bypass this sort of original purpose of any of this thought process in the first place. And then who ends up getting most left out and is really the only unprotected group is black men.
So I agree that historically there's been a concerted effort to keep black men out of the game. It goes back to that whole issue of fear and competition. I also think that black men, well, let me say it like this. I think one of the major failures of the modern civil rights movement of the 20th century, or the mid 20th century, was that black men were trying to ascribe to the same position in society as white men in the patriarchal construct, as opposed to one that was more fitting of where we came from, where there was a balance between masculine and feminine. So in that sense, black men and black women were actually standing side to side, side by side, fighting together, as opposed to one outranking in this patriarchal way that we think about it in the West, the other. And that could manifest in any kind of way. In some cases, the woman might be more fit to lead in a certain space, and others it might be the man, and others it might be both together. And then, of course, being inclusive of all the gender non-conforming folks and not relegating it to the binary. A human being is suited for what they're suited for based on their gifts and talents. So let's put the best person there. Now, that being said, the reason why we needed affirmative action is because obviously the historic ways in which inequality and inequities were just pummeled and just dumped on people of color, black people specifically, for hundreds and hundreds of years, century over top of century, right? White women were a part of that, but white women have always been power adjacent in a white supremacist society. So I don't have a problem with them, having gender pay equity. But when white women talk about gender pay equity, I'm wondering if they're talking about sisters too, right?
No,
because black women, right, they're not. And so if we're going to think about equity, I think we have to be equitable across the board, right? And that means just like in a band, right? You're a saxophone player, I'm a drummer. There's no competition, right? In fact, the better we work together, the better the band sounds, right? I'm not going to tell you how to play saxophone. You're not going to tell me how to play drums. You might have ideas in your compositions. I might have ideas about my compositions. We discuss those ideas. We get the piano player and the bass player and whomever else is in the band, together on the same page, and we go make some music. I think that's how society should work, right? And the old African proverb says, many hands make light work. If everybody did what they were put on this planet to do, purpose-wise, talent-wise, ability-wise, then we don't have this, what I think is a constructed sense of competition to keep somebody losing while others are winning. That just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the ways that this inability to address issues that have been disproportionately limiting black male mobility, upward mobility in particular. I mean, when you look at the academy, I believe that the academy is actually contributing to significant issues in our communities. So one way I think that they're doing so, if you look at the demographics in colleges and universities, there are 20,000 more black females than black males in the academy. 20,000 more.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was suggesting earlier, you said this, you said so much, it's a part of this, I think, is a reflection of laziness. I think that there is not an incentive to be really assertive about trying to find quality black men to put in positions. But I think the other issue is that the universities are allowed to check two boxes.
Mm-hmm. I'm listening.
And
I'm looking for a book.
Yeah. But the universities are allowed to check two boxes when they hire a black female.
That's right.
And so then what that incentivizes them to do is to continue to create these sort of imbalances.
Yeah. But I mean, these are 3 books by Jawanza Kunjufu called, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, Volume 1, 2, and 3, right? These are things that we know. And what we also know from so many others, like Dr. Amos Wilson's book, Awakening the Genius of the Black Child, and Dr. Joy DeGroy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and so many other texts that I literally just have all around me, because this is my primary area of research academically. I think 3 things are at work here. You're absolutely right that, the optics, again, we're talking about the spectacle as opposed to the substance. The optics are met when you hire a black woman, because you can check female box, you can check black box, right? So that's all the diversity we need. There's also the fear piece, because as powerful as black women are, white men do not respond to them in the same way that they do to black men as it relates to fear, right? Male kind of, I don't know, aggression. I don't know what it is, competition. That's not my problem. My problem is trying to figure out how, one, we not just mitigate, but eliminate the attack on all of our kids, but specifically the intellectual capacity of black boys by 3rd grade.
Yeah.
Right. When you're in a public school system, as I grew up in, where the statistics have forever been more than 85% of the teachers are white women, and it's now, plus 90%. And the way of instruction, the pedagogical methodology, and the content is not such that it keeps us engaged and informed. Our learning style is not sitting at a desk. That's not how I learned. Everything I learned was because I was moving, playing drums, doing whatever, playing basketball, and my coaches are teaching me while I'm playing basketball. James Elliott would sit me down to a drum and have me play something, and he's putting information in my brain as a kid at the same time. All the stuff I retained is because I was moving around, and it appealed to my, kinesthetic learning approach, right? The problem
That's a
is
primary
not that,
difference. It's a primary difference between the way that men, the way that men tend to learn,
general,
boys
right?
rather, and women, and
Right,
girls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's also a cultural difference.
Oh yeah, of course. Yep.
And so, we have to solve the problem of how to educate ourselves for ourselves in ways that allow us to do and build what we need to do and build so we can thrive in society, no matter where we are in the world. And if the academy is not the place for us to do that, then fuck the academy. I got 3 degrees from Ohio State, and when I was close to graduating, and there's a whole story I won't go into, but when I was close to graduating with my doctorate in classical composition, becoming only the 3rd African-American to do so, I was told that I would never teach in the academy. And not one of my 4 composition professors signed or wrote letters of recommendation or connected me to any opportunities, right? And so my father, who's also academic, PhD, all of those things, he said, you've got 1 or 2 choices. You either fight that fight or go build something on your own. Yeah. So I went and built something on my own. And right now, I teach 1 class at OSU, African-American music history, and they can't afford me as a full-time professor now. Like, I make more than the dean in my other pursuits, the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. So, I would have to take a pay cut to come teach at Ohio State or any other university for that matter. And so, now I'm helping young composers and academics figure out how to leverage their degrees and their content expertise outside of the academy to build something new, or at least something different, right? Yeah. And, it gives, to me, more meaning to being what has become a popular term, a public intellectual. I go and I've spent time in deep relationship with young people in the neighborhood that I grew up. I spent 7 years in the Boys and Girls Clubs, working with young men in particular, going through Naeem Akbar's Visions for Manhood and these Kunjufu books, and just sharing knowledge, decolonizing the mind, all these kinds of things to help them value themselves as African men in America, and then leveraging that knowledge itself to go do something and build something for their people, while also engaging and winning this capitalism game that they're in, until we figure out how to shift that system too. So it's like, we're improvisers. When we're playing, all the things you are, if you hear something different and you playing with the right musicians, you just go play what you're hearing, and they'll follow you. And then when it's time to come back to the form, you come back to the form. Nothing's keeping me in some kind of line that are artificially drawn. You know what I mean? I feel free to be an anarchist whenever I need to be.
Yeah, you use that term capitalism. And of course the term was coined by Karl Marx, and it was a pejorative. He didn't mean something right. He didn't mean something positive. Right, yeah. Right. But then the folks that the free market folks, they started calling it capitalism because of that, and so it's kind of stuck. I try to resist that term. The aspects of capitalism that I think everyone has issues with aren't usually the free market aspects. It's the crony capitalism components.
Well, there's also no such thing as a free market. There's never been a free market. The markets have always been stacked in favor of the oppressor in this sense. And then in capitalism as a construct, there always has to be a winner or loser, and it's always built from a deficit perspective. And that's the problem I have with it. And I think people, that's the fear-based mentality that I was talking about earlier. Like when you walk in a room, Shawn Thunder Wallace playing all the horn you play with a DMA from the University of Cincinnati, right? Whether or not, the folks admit it or not, just you being in there as a Black man is a threat. But you coming in with all the credentials, the background you have in terms of your body of work, and you can talk their talk, but you can also go into the world that they can't go into yet. It's like, Paul Muad'Dib and Dune. I can go to that place where nobody else can go. That's what makes me Muad'Dib. You know what I mean? That's who we are. And I tell my mentees, you don't have to go into any room waving your fist in the air, talking about, Black power. If you've done your work, you are the fist. Because we recognize that we're not limited. There's a whole book, Iceman Inheritance, by Michael Bradley, that talks about the deficit mentality that's just genetically ingrained into Europe's descendants because of the Ice Age and all other kind of things. We grew up in a land of plenty, before we were stolen away and brought to the West, what was called the New World, even though you can't discover people that already knew who they were, all of those contradictions. But, we grew up in a place where we knew who we were. We knew that we were one with the land and with each other and with, our conceptions of deity. And we had a holistic sense of being in the world that included our cosmic identity and that of our being part of the earth. When you kind of deal with that deficit mentality, you start to fragment things because value is placed on the smallest thing and not the greatest thing. And it's the greatest thing that I think we can leverage to build what we need to build. We don't need white infrastructure. Like, I agree with Thomas Sowell, who's a conservative economist, that some of these programs, and you mentioned affirmative action, may have held some folks back. But I also agree with center left, a more liberal conservative, not conservatives, more liberal economists like Bill Darity, who wrote a recent book on reparations that says we're owed some things because of the historic federal policies that have prevented us from fully participating in the economy, right? And I don't think, it's like Du Bois wasn't all the way right, and neither was Booker T. The answer was really in the middle. You needed Washington and Du Bois to find the path forward, just like we need Sowell and Darity in this case to find the path forward. And that path forward is where the anarchy happens. Because when we start building our own infrastructure that can last, that's sustainable, then we literally upset the status quo. And that's, I think, what they're afraid of.
So a couple things. One, I just did a show. I've got a panel show, live streaming show at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays. Sometimes it's on my channel. Sometimes it's on a couple of the other folks that are on the panel. It's a revolving show called Case Closed. And this past Sunday, the show was on my channel, and we did a show on reparations. And the last episode of Conversations with Dr. Thunder, I interviewed the black libertarian Larry Sharp. And the very first question that we addressed was reparations. And he has a very interesting solution to this problem. I would argue that we are owed something. The problem is, how are you going to, first of all, how are you going to get people to agree to do it? That's a big part of the problem. Another part of it is, and how are you going to do it in a way that does not do further damage to the black community? If you look at what happens, all these studies they've done on people that win the lotto. If you give people money that have not developed the financial discipline on the sort of upswing, as it were, as they were getting the money, saving the money, doing all the things that they had to do to keep the money, If you give them money, then disproportionately they will end up worse off than they were before they won. So how do you do it in a way that does not create more damage? If it is our desire, and it is my desire, to actually do it in a way that actually helps our community, then I think that's something that you have to consider. And so his solution for it actually has to do with promoting ownership by creating incentives of those that have money, usually white folks, to partner with disproportionately those that have less resources, in this case, ADOS individuals, in order to get a tax break. And this way, nobody that was not related to anything, they didn't own slaves, their family didn't own slaves. Matter of fact, they just showed up here, last year or whatever. Mm-hmm. So nobody that didn't have anything to do with slavery. Also, folks that were not hurt by slavery. In other words, people of color that, they also, just got here last week, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an interesting solution to the problem. I think it's a Herculean task just to get people to admit that something should be done. Mm-hmm. I'm always disappointed when the same talking points arise. Oh yeah, we got to do reparations, X, Y, and Z. Matter of fact, this guy that's in here now, this president now, they were talking all of that talk. Kamala was talking all of that talk, and then all of a sudden, when now we're in, well, we're not really going to do that. Which seems to be
there's a difference between political theater and political will.
Oh, of course, of course. No, right? I totally get it.
And I'm with you on that. And I think, I'll have to check out Sharp's perspective on ownership, but I think there are a couple of answers to this, at least that make sense, that I didn't come up with at all. Derek Hamilton, who used to be head of the Kirwan Institute, now is back in New York. He has some really great ideas about this, and they include baby bonds and other initiatives that invest in people, right? And I think the primary issue that we see with folks, to use your example, who hit the lottery, and that's whether or not they're black, white, purple, green, or blue. If they've been poor, or like even lower than Poe,
right?
And they
Poe was an upgrade.
The Poe was an upgrade. Right? They hit the number. You've lived your whole life not having anything, and now that you have the opportunity to have something, you're not necessarily thinking long term because you're still making decisions in crisis mode. Now you're just making crisis mentality decisions or deficit mentality decisions with $1 million, right? I had a neighbor who won $16 million, and within 4 years they were broke. 8 years they were broke. That just didn't make sense to me, except for the fact that I know for a fact, because I watched it, they didn't take a breath, and they lost the money because they were generous, because they weren't planful, and because they didn't think long term, right? So you got to invest in people, period. And so as part of a reparations package, there should be investments in not just financial literacy, because that assumes people don't know what to do with money. I've been homeless, I've been broke. I know how to manage a checkbook, right? I also, though, understand delayed gratification. Obviously, I have 3 degrees. I know that once you start a process, it takes time. You got to put in some work, till the land, and then you reap the harvest, sometime after that, right? So we have to help people understand how to make intentional decisions when that check comes, right? And ownership is a part of that, yes. But what happens if you own but don't know how to manage? There are a lot of variables, right? And so investing in people in a way that allows them to be successful, and not allows, but gives them the opportunity to be successful, because you can't make decisions for everybody. People are going to mess up. People are going to lose the money no matter what. But how do
Right.
we give the maximum opportunity to be successful to as many people as possible? You got to invest in them. That's a level of education. Investment in HBCUs to ensure they have the capacity to do the
Yeah.
culturally conscious work that needs to happen. Investing in public school education, and for that matter, investing in local after-school programs that focus on this more holistic idea of, engaging the world as, someone who has control over their own destiny, as opposed to filling in, the answer boxes on, a multiple choice test so you don't fail and your school gets funding. You know what I mean? Like, teaching to the test, all of that sucks. But the other thing is, Bill Darity, in his book, I mentioned him, From Here to Equality, says, who, in terms of who should receive reparations, are people who've, said, I'm Black on the census, in the last one or two censuses, right? So you've identified as a person who is in a marginalized group, and that means not only are you identifying, but you're living that way. And the assumption is you've borne the brunt of that identity, right? And that's, again, I hear what a lot of people say when they use the term ADOS and foundational Black Americans, I've heard, as a way of kind of delineating who gets what. But we have to understand that slavery was a period of time, a point in time, and there are those of us who can trace our lineage back to that, and absolutely we're owed. But racism is ever present. And if you've been in this country identifying as a Black person on the census and in your life, then you have been a person who has experienced racism in a way that likely created a set of challenges for you in terms of participating in the economy, building wealth, getting access to education, healthcare, all of the things that those who don't identify as an African in America or a Black person have. To your point, Southeast Asians, right? There's a whole case in the 20s, I think, Thin versus United States, where he said, I'm of the Brahmin class in India. I'm Aryan in terms of ethnicity. Therefore, I should be afforded the same benefits as white folks. I think the other case is Ozawa or Osaka versus United States, where a Japanese person made the same claims, right? There are many of us who identify as Black, African descendant, that we can't make those claims. We know it's not happening, right? So we have to think through all of that in a way that, again, allows maximum benefit, because what we're talking about is, one, strengthening a group of people who have not had the opportunity to fully participate in a way that allows them to build things on their own the way other folks do. And own is relative, right? Everybody talks about Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos as self-made. Man, they're not self-made. No, Jeff Bezos got $300,000 investment from his mom and daddy, right? That's how he started Amazon. He had enough family wealth that he went 12 years without making a profit before, Amazon really became a thing, right? Bill Gates, he got his first major contract because his mommy was well connected. He ain't self-made. He leveraged his network, but he had access. Bezos had access, right? Elon Musk has access. And so they were able to leverage their access to build the wealth that they have. And that's what we mean by inclusion and belonging, right? Reparations is not just about a check. It's about creating the level of infrastructure that allows people who have been historically marginalized to now play in the game at least at the same level as everyone else, if not with a little bit of an edge to kind of close those gaps.
Yeah, you see, I don't see reparations as something to serve necessarily all of those purposes. In my mind,
you got to read Bill Darity. He makes a hell of a case.
Yeah, I would say that it's primarily to serve the purposes of, the 40 acres and a mule, right? So we did you wrong. We clearly did you wrong. We owe you something because we stole your labor,
Mhm.
We stole your ancestors' labor. Okay? And this is what can happen. I don't see it as something that is to necessarily pay for, racism is going to be here. People are going to have bias. They're going to be prejudiced for whatever reason they want to be
bias
prejudiced
and prejudice does not equate to racism.
Okay,
I'm biased
so
and prejudiced against folks, but I'm not racist, and I don't participate in racism at the level where I'm paying someone less because they look a certain way, and I'm paying
Right.
somebody more because they look a certain way. And that's what I mean by, like,
I get
you're
that.
right. You're absolutely right. The 40 acres and the mule piece, but because of the structural racism, right? In your position, if you were white, I guarantee you'd be getting paid more. I guarantee it. That's just the way the numbers work, right? The data says that more than likely, if you identified as a white male, you would be making a significant percentage more than you're making now as a black male in the same position with the same, degrees and credentials, right?
Mm.
And so it's an ongoing theft of labor, because you're doing the same work, if not more, than your white counterpart, right? But you're getting paid less. And that's where I think the idea of reparation has to come to the 21st century.
Yeah, and that's that, you hear black musicians talk about this frequently. I certainly have felt this way. And I don't necessarily have any studies or surveys or anything to cite. I don't have any research to cite to this matter. But it sure does seem that in order for me to get the same gig, I've had to be 2 to 3 times better.
Mm-hmm. But you don't get 2 to 3 times more money.
But I don't get 2 to 3 times more money.
Right.
And, one of the reasons why I do all the stuff that I do, people say, oh yeah, you play all these instruments and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great. I appreciate you acknowledging that or noticing that. That's cool. But really, to me, it's totally, it's utilitarian.
Yeah.
I want to work.
Mm-hmm.
I want to work. And so if I see that a certain set of skills that I am capable of acquiring is what's getting you paid, then I'm going to go get that set of skills.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it has had the effect of, I'm bored easily. Well,
Mm-hmm.
So it's had the effect of solving that sort of problem for me. At some point, obviously, you start to dilute your effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And to one of the points that I was making earlier about all of the hats that you have to wear, as a musician, and one of them being this, if you're what I think the highest definition of successful, i.e. having a family, having kids, having a spouse, and being able to keep that stuff stable and going as you're still
Mm-hmm.
pursuing, this music thing, which can be extremely time consuming,
Yeah.
and energy depleting and heartbreaking,
Mm-hmm.
soul crushing.
Absolutely.
It can be all of these things. And obviously part of it has to do with picking the right person, the right kind of person
Mm-hmm.
to be with. But, as you learn how to do these other things in order to maintain those skills, you're only stacking up the amount of time that you have to spend away from your family.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the responsibility and the price of what it is we do. You know what I mean? And I say this understanding that the outcome is not the same, especially economically, But my father's a pastor. I keep saying that. He spends, inordinate amounts of time outside of the home because he's in a service-oriented profession. He has to tend to the congregants and to the community and all the other things, right? And so we grew up, honestly jealous of the church because I felt like the church was taking my daddy away. But my mother is also a minister of music. She was a elementary school reading teacher, but she was a minister of music. And so, she drug us out to rehearsals at least 3 times a week, plus Bible studies and everything. And you grow up in certain contexts, understanding that if you're going to be successful at whatever it is you do, there's going to be an investment of time that sacrifices time elsewhere. Doctors spend a lot of time with patients in the hospital. I mean, they get a lot of money for that, and we don't necessarily, at the same scale one-to-one. And the same is true for lawyers and a lot of other folks. But I think what we do is important, and it's not only important as a service, but from a spiritual perspective. With the appropriate intention, we're actually setting or applying some level of balance to the cosmos, and hoping that our small part in setting that balance, helps people be better and do better, and the time it takes to be prepared for that work, let's say, right? Like you said, the practicing, the study of the science of sound, all of those things, it's the work that we do to prepare to do what we're called to do on this planet. And I think it's well worth it, but like you said, we got to find the right partners so they understand the purpose. And it's not just passion. I put out almost 50 records under my name. Those aren't passion projects. That's purpose. You're producing because you must, not because it's fun and you want to. Of course it's fun. And of course we've been thinking about that since we were little kids and we want to. But it's deeper. It's more mission oriented than it is anything else.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about in context with the reparations, and you were talking about investing in people, and we were talking about how one of the issues is just kind of poor financial discipline. It seems to be something that plagues our communities.
At certain levels, of course, but it's the same with everybody else. Poor people, no matter where they are, don't all know how to handle money.
It's
not
true,
just
but
because they're poor; it's because they've never had the opportunity.
This is true, but if we're honest, a higher percentage of us,
disproportionately, yes, absolutely,
are poor.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the issues, but what's interesting is that we actually have significant financial power, but it's just all scatterbrained.
That's right.
Okay, so this is like in 2017. I don't have anything more recent than this. I'm sure the number is higher now.
We were the 17th largest economy in the world. Black America
just black people.
$1.25 trillion.
Well, okay, right. So this number that you just, I think it was the number that I saw was 1.7 trillion. 1.7 trillion annually.
Yep.
We spent, and then there's of course the other statistic about how long a dollar stays in our communities.
What'd you hear? 6 seconds?
6 hours.
Oh, I've heard much quicker than that. 6 seconds, because we don't own anything by way of means of production and mechanism delivery and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Claude Anderson, in his book Powernomics, talks about all of that. I have it back there on my piano, and he has a 400-year economic plan that if we really had the political will, we could solve that fairly quickly. But again, it's about how we are socialized, how we've been socialized to think about these things. Dr. John Henry Clark said the purpose of education is to prepare folks for power. And power really is the ability to define one's destiny, you know? And so you can argue that those of us who are descended from the lineage of slaves in the American context, you know, we haven't understood what it meant to be in control of our own destiny for at least 402 years or so, right? 403 years, you know, since 1690, right? So that's so many generations where we've had, you know, attempts at, you know, taking power, but we've never quite successfully been able to sustain that, right? Post slavery, during Reconstruction, we had some political power. We had economic power in the early parts of the 20th century with the various Black Wall Streets. Some sustained until the freeway system and suburbanization, and others were burnt down because our white neighbors were jealous at our economic prowess, as it were. You know, so there have been, and in federal
and state sanctioned terror.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right. So there have been a lot of successes that have been thwarted from, you know, any number of angles, and so we've never been able to sustain, to your point, that kind of growth where we could actually leverage our capital to build these institutions in our own interest, you know. But here's the question again, you know, do we want to see, I mean, you said racism is going to be here, it's not going anywhere. I agree with that, right? And our job, frankly, is not to change anybody's mind. I'm not trying to make a racist not a racist, right? And, you know, I think there's some value in shifting the systemic parts of racism in as much as we can. And those are all long-term fights that we should be fighting. The question is, as we're getting smarter about changing policy and you know, making the system that we live within more equitable and inclusive, how do we build where we can build to the point of, you know, drop your buckets where you are, Booker T. Washington? You know, how do we build within our communities? How do we build the mentalities that allow us to nation build, you know, for our own benefit, while we're also, you know, working to make the macro system better for all of us, you know? And I think those are conversations that a lot of people don't want to have because of the level of accountability that it takes. You know, freedom ain't free, man.
No, it's not. Maybe it's the most expensive thing.
That's right. It's hard. You know, but that's work we have to do.
You know, one of the things that is always disappointing when I see this is it's like we have this desire to get the pat on the head from from our from the white man. you know, to get the pat on the head, good job. And I don't know, something about me, and I don't want to say I'm a contrarian, but I don't require, I don't need to see somebody that looks like me accomplishing a certain thing before I think I can do it. But I also understand that I don't need to see it. And I realize that I'm not the usual. That's not the usual thing. Most of us need that. And sometimes that's been frustrating to me. But if I'm honest, obviously it would be a positive thing for us to see more folks doing the kinds of things that we want our kids to be doing. To look would be a positive thing. You know, I did a show. I think the question was separate but equal, not a bad thing. And it was intended to be provocative. You know, thumbnail game. You understand how that works.
Clickbait.
And Now, but the idea here is that, and I saw an interview from someone that was a school teacher just prior to Board and Brown and Board of Education case. And in the episode, I talked about the Plessy versus Ferguson and this whole separate but equal idea. See, the primary issue with the separate but equal thing is that it was separate, but it was not equal.
Right.
And however, but this sort of forced integration and the, I think, destruction that caused in our communities, especially with respect to sort of spreading out our economic power. Right?
Absolutely.
So, and
political power.
And political power, so one thing that's interesting too is, like, when you think about slavery, you think about, black folks, ADOS folks, whatever. It gives the sort of illusion that we are the same, but actually where we were taken from is thousands of different tribes. So in our ancestry, we're not the same. And actually, the one thing that actually unified us, and this is
was that experience.
Right. It was slavery.
Yeah,
that was the thing that actually unified us. It was slavery. So then when you take that away, and then also take the force that was forcing us to have to stay together, when you take that away, and rather than just that, actually forcing us. And then, of course, real integration would have been, you took white folks and you put them into black neighborhoods also. It wouldn't have just been take the black folks and put them, spread them out. It would have said, hey, well, we're going to have some white folks going here too. But of course, they weren't going to do that. So there's a lot of challenges with that. This is how this stuff has rolled out. But, politically, I have sort of gotten back to, I more or less, I almost can't believe that this is the case, but I'm pretty much a black nationalist now. That's pretty much where I've landed, because I don't think white folks, I don't think that this government, the United States, is ever going to do right by us. And so I think the only answer is to say, forget that. We just need to do it ourselves.
And that's when the government comes and says, what can we do for you? It's one of those things. So, politically, I'm probably more center left. So I'm a social liberal, fiscal conservative, democratic socialist, right? Who deeper than that is a Pan-Africanist, but also to the extent that you described, ascribe to many tenets of black nationalism for a number of reasons. I think that in order for us to truly heal, we have to have safe spaces for us to just be us. And as long as we're out here integrated in the way that we have been, that dilutes our social capital, our cultural capital, our capital, like economic capital, and our political capital, it's going to be really hard for us to get back to a place where we are in control of our own destiny in the way that we exist right now, right? And I agree with that. So I think, like Jewish folks have Jewish schools, Chinese folks have Chinese schools. We should have Africa schools. You know what I'm saying? And we should deal with rites of passage, so our young people really understand who they're from. Now, to your point about, the different ethnic groups that all were, ensnared in this whole slave thing, we weren't the same people, but we had very similar values and ideals about the world. That's true. Right? But we did speak different languages. We did have some different customs that overlapped in some cases, but we were different people, right? Yeah. Um, to, the filter of slavery, I think we have to honor the differences because we descend from people who came from different ethnic groups, but we also have to honor the filter that slavery became. And that made us, you know, I argue that being Black is a new ethnic group because of the filter of slavery, right?
Oh,
It
yeah.
blended all of those differences and all of that energy and intellect and wisdom and spiritual power into a new people. And Amiri Baraka calls us the blues people, right?
Yep.
And so I think we can create new rituals. I think we can create rites of passage that makes sense for us. And I think we can create an America that works for us. You know, the only reason why I think America doesn't work for us is because we haven't, to your point, leveraged the power that we do have in a sustainable way to take what we deserve.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think we can do that.
Yeah, I was in that episode about separate but equal. There was a Malcolm X interview, and he was, they they ask questions and they're kind of asking the same question, and he keeps saying the same thing, right? But he finds different ways to say the same thing, and he's so brilliant and so clear of thought, and it's hard to beat what it is that he says, So, but one of the points that he made was, when his issues with forced integration is that he says it's hypocrisy, because what you're doing is you're forcing people to put their arm around you that don't like you. Okay. And he says, whenever an inferior people, and when he says that, he means politically and economically, there will be a natural disdain for another community of folks
not equal power
to accept them
together
because they're not equal.
That's right.
And so he said, so the only solution for this problem is that you must become powerful politically and economically. And then you can come together. And he even made the statement, or said something to the effect of, when you're talking about equals, the idea of integration never comes up.
That's right. That's right. Equals retain, unto themselves who they are, and don't mix to dilute, right? And Malcolm is a huge influence on my political thought. But I think toward the end, he and King were coming closer together. I mean, King makes the same argument, right? In his mountaintop speech, he says, in order for us to achieve exactly that, by way of political and economic power, we have to first unite, right? Keep relevant issues to the fore. Like, all this other stuff is petty, right? Your religious affiliation, my religious affiliation doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, it means something to you, it means something to me, but in these larger things, that's not something we need to argue about, right? Even Malcolm X in the Ballad of the Bullet speech said, they're not killing me because I'm Muslim, they're killing me because I'm Black. They're not killing you because you're Christian, they're killing you because you're Black, right? So we have to keep relevant issues to the fore. And then King says, we have to the point, control our economic resources. That's the third thing. And then he says, we have to build Black institutions. He didn't, those my language interpreting what he said, he didn't say Black institutions, but he was talking about sustainable infrastructure. And then he said, we have to sustain engagement. We have to be engaged for the long term. Because we don't have the opportunity to build the power that allows us to not just demand, but compel, right? What did Frederick Douglass say? Frederick Douglass said, power sees nothing without demand. But you can make all the demands you want. If you don't have the power to compel compliance, then demands can go unheard, right? You got kids. Your son says, Daddy, you're going to buy me an ice cream cone. And you'll look at him and be like, all right, bud. You know what I mean? You're really blowing him off, because your son has no power to compel you to go buy that ice cream cone, right?
Right.
But if your son has done something that puts you in a position where you can't say no, and this is what I tell my children, if you do everything you're supposed to do and you then ask something of me, as long as you've taken care of your business, you're putting me in a position where I can't say no. You now have compelled me to comply, right? Once we're equal in terms of our power, and equal is a relative thing, right? Because there are only 40, 50 million of us, and then another, it's 350 million, so 310 million, of America, without us. So equal is relative, but we're a country unto ourselves, and if we begin to behave like a country, then we can leverage a lot to get what we need out of the American system, and that includes, again, Claude Anderson is talking about not just building businesses here in America, but engaging in international trade with our brothers and sisters on the continent. That's where the Pan-Africanism comes in. We start thinking like that and thinking as a nation, then America has to deal with us in a different way.
Yeah. Well, Mark, we could keep going because it seems like we just got started. And well, I'm going to have you back sometime soon, hopefully. But thanks for taking the time. Appreciate your time and your energy. And please keep doing what you do.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. God bless you.
You too. Peace.
Peace.